with those who can. I'm Moritz Bierling, and today I'm talking with Josh Rieder. This is Josh's first podcast appearance, which I feel it is an honor and privilege to host for him. I myself have been a gracious guest of his own hospitality when he organized the Natural Law Institute's fall conference last year, and took great pains to make it a pleasant and productive time for all of us. And I brought Josh on today because the theme of this podcast, or whatever you want to call it, is very much about this distinction between the ones who talk and the ones who do. And this is not to say that talking and oratory or convincing people is worthless. Far from it. In fact, we do need a lot of capable people articulating what their positions are, what worthwhile endeavors are to combat back against lies and poison in the public airwaves. But at the end of the day, if all that we can accomplish is to change somebody's mind or simply spend time being watched by others, then I think we will likely have not spent our time in the best way possible. So with Josh, he is somebody who's very much doing things in the background. And I guess the thing that really made me want to bring him on is that in my own life, I have a father. He did a good job of educating and kind of parenting me. But there is an element, especially in the context of German culture, where there is a lack of genuine and healthy pride in one's own people, one's own culture, one's own background. And so to the extent that that is still present, as far as I've been able to tell in German Texas country, Josh is, I think, the perfect representation of that. And it very much has to do with this being welcoming, being clear about what one's boundaries and expectations are, taking an extra element of pride in bringing somebody into the fold. And so, I know, that's kind of my opening monologue. Thank you for coming on, Josh. We have a lot to talk
Thanks
about.
for having me.
And yeah, so I guess my first question to you is, where did the impulse to, if not create the event, because that came kind of from the Institute proper, but at least host and take this active role in bringing people there and organizing a large extent of the event? Where does that come from, or where is that rooted in you? Why did this feel like something you wanted to make happen or have play a role in?
Well, I have two answers to that. One is kind of funny. I actually told Kurt the other day, told my father on Thanksgiving. I could share it. It's a little bit long-winded, but I don't know how much that'd be appreciated for the humor involved. It's a little bit sadistic in a way, but it comes down to lederhosen.
Mm-hmm.
I needed a new pair, and I found the most long roundabout way of getting there. And that's a very, very short story for that one answer. Actually, what it comes down to is, you might say the way I was brought up, it's very much community oriented. And there's different types of community. You have your online communities that you might have thousands of miles between the closest person. You have your immediate family unit, your neighbor, and it just expands out. And with all those different types of community in mind, both the hierarchy of communities and the different types, it's something that has to be maintained. It doesn't just exist. It doesn't just start on its own. It's not spontaneous. It takes work. It takes effort and cultivation, and to really culture any kind of community, whether it's through leadership or somebody willing to just put in the effort and show up, everybody has a part to play. And if they're not playing that part, they're not in a community. So that's really where the basis of it all comes from. And
And
there are plenty of examples that we do in my family now, my extended family, that we've been doing for a long time. The traditions, if you will, that turn into a heritage. So we can
and
elaborate more on that in a minute. But
did you get taught this from your parents, from the people that you grew up with? Like, how did this become something anchored in your very being?
yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, brought up with it. Uh, a good example currently that's been going on for a few decades. Every Christmas, right before Christmas Eve, we'll do a big turkey barbecue. This year we're barbecuing about 175 15-pound turkeys. That's a
Wow.
big feat. Well, in this big 24-hour long party that we have and host at the barn, Santa Claus shows up in a helicopter that's fun for the kids. We'll have a couple of sheriffs, a couple of county judges from the neighboring counties, sheriff's department, all the family and friends and neighbors. It's a big event. And we'll go through 2 kegs of beer easy, eat the turkeys, take turkeys home. It's building community. And whether you're actually helping to season the meat and cook it and you're staying up all night to cook it, or you're showing up just to participate in the fellowship and be grateful that you're part of a community, everybody is participating one way or another. You need someone to host too in a community event like that. So it's not just for the goodwill. Obviously, it's building and maintaining relationships. You know somebody that it's not just to have influence, but a sheriff knows you, a deputy knows you, you know them. There's a relationship, not just the idea of their existence. And
Mm,
you have a neighbor you can count on. If you're sick or if they're sick, it's kind of like taking a church congregation and expanding that and really just a bigger umbrella.
right.
And
Right.
that's
Right.
really
Right.
what it's become. And we have other similar situations. That's just the most recent coming up in a couple of weeks that we're doing. So that happens a lot, whether it be in an immediate farming community or through multiple kind of adjacent industries in our region. So that's something that being brought up with, I tend to just, that's my default mode of operation. I do that. Reach
I,
out and build community.
I love that because, to my mind, this is this difference between, like, I recognize a strong um, a strong resonance with something I feel myself compelled to do as well, and yet there's a difference in how I grew up or was oriented for most of my adult life as well, which is this very analytic observing from the side or from the back and waiting until I was called upon to take action, or to even waiting to understand sufficiently what was going on or whether my contribution was welcome or good or so on before I did that. And it is a real shame to, I think, not only rob the individuals who feel and act like that, but even more so the communities that they are supposedly embedded in of their genuine contributions, when that is their default mode. I saw this quite starkly also in the Modern Minuteman program that I currently run, or that I just completed the second cohort of. I take about 25, 30 people now for the second time through essentially a month-long program, online program, of course, where the intent is to offer them both kind of intellectual input that might be something new to them, something that might open up new understanding and ways of orienting themselves. Very much also in this direction of taking responsibility, taking a look around you, like who are the people that you can count on? What can you do with them in physical space rather than only in online interaction? How do you leverage this incredible technology that we have available to do things in the real world? But what I noticed is that this is really what the young men, especially, are longing for, and oftentimes don't even have the language to express, simply because by the time that they became self-conscious, self-aware, semi-responsible members of society, uh, the scaffolding that used to situate somebody thoroughly in a community context had already degenerated sufficiently that they don't even know what they're missing. For them, images and talk of community is something that takes place in the head, not something that they have a memory of in the heart. And so, to my mind, the challenge that we have at the moment in guiding young men is to offer them tangible experiences, tangible ways to have these direct experiences with the with somebody actually sacrificing on their behalf, rather than telling them, oh, you need to take responsibility, you need to bootstrap yourself, you need, like, all of those things are true, and it is not enough. It is not enough to place the sole responsibility to develop young men into competent, capable members, perhaps even leaders of their communities, only onto their shoulders. The culture at large, the community that they are supposed to be embedded in, and especially the older men, have an additional responsibility to offer them a helping hand into those positions of responsibility. And so, in my relationship with you, this is what I appreciate about your way of moving through the world, is that you are constantly looking for these opportunities where young men or anybody who is around you can be brought into a position of responsibility, be supported in exercising that well, and then essentially become a valued member of a group of people. So I don't know if there's anything you can respond to that. I don't really have a question there, but yeah.
Yeah, I think if you had to have one word for a theme of this particular podcast, it would be stewardship. And that that'll probably be the answer to at least one, if not two, of the questions you'll ask me later, I'm sure. Stewardship. That's exactly what it is. We have a reason and a purpose, and everyone has their own personal mission, but everybody should be good stewards of the life they have. And all the assets, whether it be land, any kind of capital. You're a steward of that.
Right.
Do something good with it.
Right. Right.
So,
In some sense, we in the West, or Christendom, or European civilizations, the several of them perhaps that there are in some sense a victim of our own success. We succeeded so much, so incredibly largely, that the very need to secure our individual safety essentially fell away by virtue of creating what essentially becomes an open-air garden, right? Like when you have a society, a nation state perhaps, that is well ordered, that has sound laws, that has capable and responsible members, then it isn't really necessary for the individuals so much as it was before, like practically, to look out for their fellow man in all instances. To some extent, you can kind of, and we really have, easily forgotten about that, whether by our own making alone or by those who would wish to destroy us. And then we pursue this individual, atomized, self-interested acquisition of property, perhaps this accumulation of nominal or virtual wins, perhaps by increasing our bank account or arbitrarily raising our status, disconnected from what that status actually entails in terms of responsibility. And so one of the recent changes in my thinking, somewhat departing from what a lot of the Natural Law Institute's work has consisted of, because it tends to take the institutional large-scale view, is this need for the return of nested authorities and the kind of subsidiarity of relationships between people who are capable of acting responsibly at increasing scales. And so, to my mind, something that the feudal world used to have that we no longer really have that much is this lords and knights and barons and duches and princes and kings and these various forms of title and standing that not only gave those who helped them privileges, those are very visible and very easy to be resentful about from the position of somebody who doesn't hold them. But what is less visible and what is more onerous, really, but oftentimes gladly exercised, are the responsibilities and duties and obligations that come along with those titles. This is something that I've picked up a lot from Ian Burlingame recently, who talks a lot about how that worked in the English context, where you had the king, the nobles, and the people, this kind of tripartite division of power. And each of these held each other in check and had reciprocal obligations and privileges with respect to one another. So I'm kind of curious, like, do you see a similar thing as I'm seeing? And do you see either developments right now in the world where something like that is possible to resurrect? Are you perhaps working in that realm? Like, how are you thinking about that?
As far as resurrecting that, yeah, there's definitely a need and a great desire among people, and most of them just don't know what to do or where to turn to. There's a big hole in that department for sure. Um, to say I'm actively working on it, obviously yes, but not necessarily in the macro sense that I might always speak in.
Right.
Just raising a family and doing it in a particular way to where they're prepared to, as I said, take stewardship of
Yeah.
that responsibility.
Yeah.
And with 6 kids right now, I mean, I'm extremely busy for how bored I am sometimes. Very
Very well
busy.
said. Very well
Yeah.
said.
So, but to your point, I would say the oldest right now, he's 17, a junior in high school, and he is in a very different place in life than I was at his age.
Mm.
And the young men that are a few years older than him, they I would put them on that same category, but they see a very big, not just the system breaking, but they see the flaws that weren't obvious 20 years ago to most people. And they see it and they're bracing themselves for it or preparing for it in other ways that even if they're not being guided by somebody, it's so obvious now. They're not walking into it blindly and believing we'll just say, believe in the lies that you're going to go to college and make a lot of money. And by the time you have been graduated for 3 years, you're going to have a house as big as your boomer parents. They know better. So, as far as how that's going to look, it's hard to really predict and forecast because it's going to be a lot of small, as we move forward, especially in this country, authority is going to come from the bottom and work its way up. It's not going to be a top down anymore. It can be a lot less decentralized. So, a situation like having that barbecue for the sheriff and the judge, that level of community at the local level, that's where that kind of repair work happens. And to do it at a even more focused level of the individual or a certain specific demographic and generation, it's going to come from people that do that already, that have that network of people, not just in power, but of ability. You don't have to be in a position of authority to have any kind of ability to share and knowledge and skills and assets. And no matter where you are in the network, everybody has a place to play in community.
Right.
You
Right.
just have to be in it,
I
participate.
remember, in at the conference itself, we had a guest speaker, Andrew, and he sp- he spoke about this this distinction between near influence and far influence, very much in the direction of what you're saying. Like, he himself has, I think, 5 children at this point. I remember, I don't remember quite the number, but I think it was definitely somewhere up there. And he himself was also recounting how living amongst his siblings with his parents as well, not in the sense of being all in one house, but being in close proximity to them, uh, and then even conducting an entire family's move from New York, I think, down to Texas or another place where they're living now collectively together. That is a incredible thing to do in the modern world. Like it basically never happens that an entire family, not just the nuclear one, picks up and leaves collectively and goes somewhere else because their ties are so strong that this seems like the only sensible thing to do. So, what are you teaching your sons, your daughters, that kind of goes in this direction of valuing family and understanding that the relationships one has with one's family members are a primary good to rely on and to cultivate in the world? Yeah, how are you doing that?
A good example would be just maintaining trust. And one story that's happened a few times, but tattletelling. Somebody did this or they said this word, okay? And you told on them. So what's more important? Me going to punish them or give them a good talk about something they shouldn't do? Or the fact that you just violated and broke the trust of your sibling? How do they know they can trust you when it's something that matters, when it's something that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter? Maybe maybe you should just be with your siblings and figure out your own little issues. Don't bring daddy in because when you come to me, you're absolutely forfeiting any kind of autonomy and authority that you may have had to just say, hey, you shouldn't say that word, brother. And now here I am, and you're the one getting a talking to, not him.
Mm-hmm.
So raising him in that sense of having a responsibility, but also the ability to discern not just right and wrong, but appropriate levels of trust and acceptance. And when do you finally say, hey, that person is going to bring me down?
Mm.
That's really probably the best framework I could put it in for the message to them.
Right,
It,
right.
it's
In some
just,
sense, it's making them aware of the dynamics that might otherwise go unexamined, right? Like when you're growing up as a young man, of course, your primary objective really, other than surviving and kind of in this existential sense, is to assert yourself, to grow capability and to become somebody, well, capable enough to essentially pay for one's own existence. And I don't mean just financially. And at the same time, that can oftentimes conflict with that with these goods that we perhaps value inappropriately or don't value enough, which as a young man, perhaps not taking it into account when you're doing that. And of course, it's not to say that we're trying to make young men or anybody really into these extremely considerate, naively and perhaps selflessly so, yeah, kind of neutered people. That's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is uh, helping them see forms of value that are harder to see when you're very much caught up in your own world. So, do you then make specific reference to perhaps family culture, like we don't do this in this family, or this is not something that a Texan or a German Texan, or like, does this play at all into any form of identity for you, or is it just these are the rules of my house?
both. I don't necessarily come right out and say, we don't do that because we are this.
Right.
That's just kind of always the, it's kind of an unspoken because it's been spoken so much and it's just always been so present. I don't have to say it.
Right. Right. Right.
So which maybe it needs to be said more often, anyhow, just because. But yeah, there are some things that they will say often enough to where the inverse would be inappropriate enough to say on this podcast
Mm-hmm.
and inappropriate enough to where I say we don't call each other that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you're not one of those and your brother is not one of those. And you're one of those, you don't say that
Right.
because we're not that. So that does happen on occasion too.
In
And
at the conference, you you gave every member who attended a pin, and this really is the reason I called this episode "Showing Up." Can you tell us the story, please, and why this felt like something worth doing?
yeah, when somebody's willing to show up, to be present, to be counted, and that's some kind of participation. When you want to participate, that's a form of agency. And you know, you can say you have your producers, you have your service providers, and you have your consumers, and you have your parasites. By showing up, you're automatically, at the very least, a spectator, at the very least. And by interacting, you become more of a service provider at that point. It might only be providing feedback, but you're there. You're an active audience instead of passive. So, in that sense, we need everybody in a community like that. And to distinguish who is in that community and who was there or not, a small little token or a trophy. You know, we went on that trip a few months ago. We had the shirts made, and that was a definitely a smaller group, but that general slogan on the back of the shirt, work like a captain, play like a pirate. You show up for both, whether it's working or playing. You do it together, and you give it everything you got. So in that case, a small pin for showing up and to remind everybody I was there, and it reminds everybody of the community they had and that they're still part of it, and they could probably, if not do that same kind of thing again, they have it in them to do more and to keep going.
I think that's what you did with that seemingly simple gesture. I think set off quite a follow-on development in myself as well. I've thought about that a number of times since that conference, and I think it did invite me to take that smidgen more consideration into account for how I can make experiences that I share with others more memorable and more significant. A lot of the times, it is easy to take for granted that we have it good in very serious ways, that we have good people around us when we do, and to not grant them even the gift of our simple presence, unadulterated presence, right? Like a lot of the time, I'll catch myself in the evening sitting next to my girlfriend and we're both on the phone, and I'm like, okay, let's put this phone down. Why are we doing that than giving each other our attention? And that is not necessarily a moralistic exhortation that you're a bad person if this is what your life looks like, but it is an invitation, and it has been your pin giving has been an invitation to myself to more often notice when I'm unconsciously falling back into that absence of training, perhaps, and then beyond that, take slightly greater pains to make a experience more memorable and to make it a thing rather than just another eddy in the current that is always kind of running kind of passively by one in one's life. And it yeah it is a joy to be able to offer others the a kind of a small sacrifice that then makes them perk up and like, oh, somebody did something that took effort. So they're actually investing in me right now, like not in this financial sense, but they're seriously taking time out of their day to make to enrich me directly. So actually, what do they see in me perhaps that I might not even be seeing myself if I'm kind of in a bad place? And if I am already in a good place, I should probably honor that small sacrifice with at least valuing my time highly enough to do good things with it, or to repay that in other ways that I can, whether directly to the ones who I received it from or to others around one. And I think it's these kinds of small and sometimes invisible behaviors that make it possible for a society at large to actually function. It's the typical regular old, what is it called, shopping cart problem, right? Like if nobody puts the shopping cart back to where the shopping carts are supposed to be at, then everybody's going to have a bad time. And if everybody puts the shopping cart back to where they're supposed to be at, then everybody's going to have a great time. And so, and a society stands or falls on the willingness and ability of its members to, to, well, to take that little extra step that maintains the commons as we see them. So, in your experience, is that kind of behavior still present in where you live, where you grew up, and perhaps how do you view that at large as well in the United States at the moment?
So where I am, yeah, it's present. You can use that shopping cart analogy. That definitely is something that happens. People put it back, and it's a small thing, but even the grocery stores have figured out that if you only have one little receptacle to put your cart, only carts in that immediate area go in it. If you got to push it 200 yards, people aren't going to. So in some ways, there's been a little bit of a, we'll call it some built-in safety nets. But as far as the behavior in general go, there's differences in generations and cultures that have, we'll call them relatively new to various regions, especially around bigger cities, Houston, Dallas. But as a whole, that level of personal responsibility and stewardship is still rather prevalent. Um, I'm not sure where all you've traveled in Texas, but throughout the rest of the country, there are pockets where it's very good, and some places it's just awful. You don't want to go back. You're embarrassed for them, and they can't even see it themselves. And it's not an entitlement; they just simply don't care, which is probably worse than entitlement. They're there's not a nice word for it. They just really don't want you or anyone else to have something nice. It's that irrelevant to them, and there's no reverence for anything, whether it be their own personal possessions or anyone else's. They simply don't care, and that I'll say that's partly a cultural thing, but there's some. Again, I can get lost in the weeds. That's
Some
when we
other
can just really
factors.
drift away from the point. Sure,
Yeah.
but ultimately, communities have expectations. In my immediate town, they just opened up a really nice event center, like live music, concerts, movies, outdoors, indoor, multiple bars, restaurants on a city block. This whole thing in cooperation with the city, but privately run. And it is incredible. It's nice. They don't have metal detectors set up, open doors. You come in, you don't have to pay unless it's a big, named artist performing music. Aside from that, just show up. It's a community center. You can buy food, but it's a really nice place for kids to play on, whether it be summer, winter time, just nice. Because everybody in that community is responsible enough to take care of it and to treat it respectfully and realize that it's theirs. They don't own it, but it belongs to them.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that's
I,
been
I,
open for just a month or
right. I In your presentation at the conference, you spoke on Oktoberfest as well, and you shared a bit about how Fredericksburg, the location of the conference, had been founded, I believe, in 1846 by German immigrants. And in your presentation, you also talked about how those founders, I guess, approached cultural preservation with some foresight. They invested in that sense of collective effort I sense, and I guess, and in some sense, the entire project of the United States is a great example of this collective production, right? Like you you may need to both individually and collectively create a shared understanding enough that all of these people with their disparate interests on the individual and perhaps even group level are willing to put aside or to somewhat compromise or trade at least where their interests don't align with the others that are distinct from them. I guess what I remember from that speech as well, and what I think it would be good for all of us to understand today, as we are in this experience of slowly but steadily worsening perhaps collective investment in these commons, is that this is not something new. It's not something that is unique. This has happened many, many times throughout our history and throughout the history of other peoples. And so in some sense, this should give us a sense of peace and perhaps invite us to actually look at previous times and how others responded to those challenges. I'm particularly thinking here of who you cited, John Meusebach, and then also Joseph Vogel's Lederhosen defiance. Can you explain what that was and why this seemed significant?
Well, I guess first, going back to what you said about like Fredericksburg, they had the rules in place and certain requirements, being in good standing, being a good citizen. But at the same time, they enforced violations. You can lose your homestead. We'll take it away. You're out of here. We don't need you if you're going to be unproductive or very counterproductive to our little society. So, with that in place, it left at the very least a residual to where even in modern times, their building codes in that one town, they maintained a certain type of building code where you had to look and make your building look a certain way. And now it's got a community, and 200 years later, that people want to go and travel to spend money on overpriced goods. There's not really a big draw there. It's something that you feel because they made sure that it existed. They created something that was intangible, and they're managing to capitalize on it now, but it's still just a beautiful little town, middle of nowhere. And with that in mind, it starts from having standing for something and not compromising it to the point where you allow something to deteriorate or to allow something in that doesn't belong, that doesn't fit, that is counterintuitive to what you set out to be and to have. And then moving on to the Lederhosen, that idea of defiance, it was in kind of multifaceted, partly defying the loss of the German identity and to establish, even if they weren't actually setting out to establish anything, they managed to by influence the king. And they found just a common garment, a work, a leather outfit for work, and made that iconic, the way a cowboy hat is and boots for a Texan. And that's when you see it, that's what you think. Ah, that guy's German because he has on lederhosen. Nobody walks around wearing it, but it's there. Oh, there it is. Hey, what? It's a good-looking guy. But two very iconic things, and they're together. And you saw more than one guy walking around looking like that at the event. It's something that, the historical reference, it's only about 100, 150 years old. It was always a traditional thing they wore, but the ornamentation, the embroidery, something that was really a fashion statement, that didn't come about until, we'll say, German culture was being diluted.
Right, right.
Maybe it was intentional, But that coupled with a king that wanted to make sure that there was a German culture and a very distinct identity, when they found that, it it took on. It became very
Right.
popular, and I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Uh,
I wish it was
In,
more popular. I'd rather wear wet, huh?
in some
I'd
way,
rather wear the
go ahead.
you.
Okay. In some
Yeah.
way, it's perhaps that gave Bavaria this distinct identity that still to this day somewhat gives them this patriotic feeling with respect to their state and their like their province's culture rather than the larger German culture. And in fact, to the extent that in the eyes of the world, Bavarian culture is German culture, because all that they think about in terms of Germany is Lederhosen, Oktoberfest, and beer, which is really Bavarian culture. So,
Yeah,
but
the southernmost quarter to a third of the country kind of represents everything else.
that's
In
right.
many ways, people confuse Texas or the Texas flag with American and the more illiterate places, but they see the same thing, a bunch of cowboys. And
Right.
there's not many, but it, it it's an identity for
Right.
sure.
And I guess the lesson I'm taking from that historical anecdote is that it doesn't really matter how big or small the symbol is that you pick out to uh, elevate a sense of in versus out group. Like for them, it was a simple work garment, as you said, like a very practical item, but it was a distinct enough thing that it clearly and cleanly separated the outsiders from the insiders. And often that is really all you need in order to show in your own collective's consciousness and to the external collective's consciousness that there is a separation, there is something that is distinct enough that the words that float on top of that distinctness cannot obscure, finally, if the people who remember their identity take the pains to invest in it and to make that clear. And and so perhaps in modern day, as we are in times where that is once again occurring, you can essentially do this with anything. Like anything that has some modest tie to one's own identity. And of course, the challenge, I guess, today is that we live simultaneously in this digital world that is a kind of frontier that everybody participates in, and where lots of people and groups and so on interact. And then, depending on where you live in the States or in the world, that is even your physical surroundings as well in these large blue cities, for example. But it may not be when you're more in a rural town, perhaps. And I think we're currently seeing also this distinction or this difficulty of where to place one's effort collectively when your identity is under threat, being hashed out in the public conversation between the kind of people like a Nick Fuentes that would rather put the energy and attention on the national or states, top federal state level political level and the institutions that represent that federal power and the kind of voting game that would bring those interests back into the fore. And people like Eric Orwell, who runs Return to the Land, where they take a different approach, which is to essentially get some land, return to land, as the group's name says, and to build and rebuild again some form of genuine community, and not to run away necessarily from larger conflict or engagement with the challenges, but to at least have a place one can call one's own, where one is safe and where one is amongst one's own, rather than an atomized individual amidst a number of other atomized individuals in one's own apartments sitting in front of screens. That is not necessarily a form of collectivity I find quite appealing enough, and that has not really enough ability to practically undergird the ability of a group to actually exercise power in any meaningful sense, or at least assert its own interests. So you don't need to go perhaps into all of the details of this, but how do you think about this challenge of where to place one's attention with respect to representing and asserting one's interests, working with others who may have differing ones, with respect to kind of this digital communication world and the in-person interaction and experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in reverse, kind of from a top down. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned like at the national, two examples. One, years back, Hurricane Harvey, when that hit the Corpus Christi, Houston area, it was probably about 6 years ago, or more than that, actually. It was a little while back, a few years. And all the networks, whether it be the churches, the various little organizations, were already organized. They weren't suddenly thinking, we have a catastrophe, let's figure this out. As soon as it happened, they started cleanup, they started helping, they started taking care of everything to the point where when President Trump flies in Air Force One, he comes out and says, I don't even know why Texas stays in the Union. You don't need us. And that wasn't FEMA out there, that wasn't the National Guard, that was us, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Me and people like me, our networks of friends and community just coming together. Hey, do you need food? People show up with their barbecue pits on a trailer and start cooking. Other people show up with their chainsaw, start cutting stuff up, clearing roads. They're there with farm tractors, moving things out of the way. And this is the day after the storm goes away. We didn't wait a week for some other federal agency to show up to tell us what to do. Didn't need it. We are already in place because of the community and the network. So, a strong area. More recently, and this would have been back in July, just real close to Fredericksburg, actually. On July 4th, we had all the rains in the Texas Hill Country and all the flooding that happened overnight, and water came up real fast, killed a bunch of people, lost a bunch. And that was an ongoing, it wasn't just a small event, it happened a couple of times to where you can go in there and people are on foot, they had dogs, they had people mounted. It was almost all essentially volunteer. Uh, Not every volunteer was needed. Some of them were showing up because they just want to say they were involved, which is still a good thing to want to be involved. But to finally go into what can people do, it starts with you. You can't have a community of affected people if everybody in the community doesn't know anything. If they're ignorant, if they're incapable and incompetent, learn hard things. Know first aid. Get CPR certified. Know how to operate a forklift. Something. All this is stuff that you can almost learn online. There are classes you can take. You can go do it in person. Learn how to be useful. Have a skill, a hard skill that you can, if not market, at least fall back on to where, again, maybe you're not making money doing it, but it's a, maybe, and not quite a trade, but it's a skill set to where you are an asset in some way or another. And that's a good place to start. You don't have to do it with people, you can do it on your own. And then when you learn how easy it actually is, you can organize a training session. Hey, come and let's have a small community event and get CPR certified. Let's spend the day and do an OSHA forklift class or something. Do something, anything. It starts that way and present it as a way to better yourself and to network with other people that have the same mindset and the same goal in mind to where if things do get bad, you already know these people. You know what they're
Right.
capable of. You know they care. It's already there. That's an easy way to do it, especially when you don't have anything to start off with. Just start talking to people. Get involved with them and lift them up, and they'll lift you up also.
Right.
That's the
It's
best
very
way.
much you can very much like you did and like with Thanksgiving, make a party out of it. I mean, there's
Yeah.
this beautiful format that some of our guys in the Pacific Northwest in the NLI scene that they do and that they have been doing for a while now, which is called a work party. And it is essentially the next step once you've done something as an individual or maybe as a small group. And something you can do beyond just hanging out, right? Like hanging out can be fun, but let's be honest, it's not very productive, nor does it need to be. But a work party essentially takes the logic of we like each other enough to spend time around each other. Why don't we use that time in a way that directly advances our well-being and our capacity, right? And so, yeah, you can do things like go to somebody's backyard and build them a chicken coop. Maybe that's not for you. Maybe it's more about learning a practical skill together, like, for example, the kind of emergency responder type skills. Or maybe it is practicing getting somebody, rucking somebody from a forest back to civilization. Or there's any number of things you can do depending on your interest and your ability and your kind of what kind of fun you like to have. But the point is to spend time with people that you value and to spend that time well. So have you ever participated in kind of a work party, like other than this kind of Thanksgiving way of cooking that many turkeys, or like, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the churches in the area do just that. It might be focused on very, very needy. It might be focused on the more elderly within a congregation. It might be as simple as we need to go out and cook for the homeless every Thursday night. Maybe it's sloppy Joe, whatever. So that exists, and there are so many. Just trying to think of a really good example that sounds impressive. There's a bunch that people do, that friends or family do, that I've been part of. You can't do it all. It's still balancing your time, and you can give. I don't want to say give too much of yourself, but you can get to the point where you're not giving good quality,
Hmm.
and you have to be a little bit discerning about, are you doing this just to be really a good person, or are you trying to build something through this charitable or
Right.
this work party? What's really the benefit? What's being gained? It's
Hmm.
not just simply being selfless. You want to make sure that your time is, because everybody's time is worth, it's invaluable. So where
Right.
you're devoting your time, who you're giving it to, who you're giving it with, is important. You don't want to just throw it around freely and say, I feel fulfilled because I did something.
Right.
So,
In some sense, this is essentially the approach I'm taking with Modern Minutemen as well, which is to uh, provide an on-ramp to doing things in the real world through the digital, right? Like my interest is not to make this tantalizing spectacle that somebody can sink the entirety of their free time into. Far from it. It is more to remind them that those opportunities in the real world exist, that they are available to them simply through their own effort. You don't need external structures to set them up, but they are still out there in rudimentary form or even in good form to the degree that you can find and integrate with them. Uh, and then to also offer practical examples how you can make good use of your online time as well. I mean, heck, if you don't have people around you in person that you can work with, then you can at least work with the people that you have some form of shared interest with, whether it is gaming or some political discussion or whatever it may be. Make an extra step beyond the group chat where you share dank memes or kind of discuss the latest political news of the day. Call somebody, like have a half to an hour Zoom call and introduce yourself and talk about your interests and perhaps even go so far as to, hey, I'm gonna do like a 2 hour stretch of time on this Saturday where I invite everybody to join my Zoom room or whatever it is, Discord, whatever your preferred platform is, and we're going to make a poster, a digital poster, or we're going to create a little video, or anything that is something where you can develop skill in over time, so that you're not just in this passive consumptive posture that we all tend to fall back into unless we have a clear mission that we feel strongly about and that pulls us forward to the extent that all of the distractions that otherwise would grab at our attention simply become irrelevant and really don't really have that tug on us anymore. So, in that spirit, how do you view your mission to the extent that you have one? Do you articulate it in an explicit way? Is it something that you just feel like? Yeah, what is your mission?
Yeah, so trying to really focus it down, it still comes out in the macro sense of stewardship. Every blessing in my life, I didn't go necessarily generate it myself.
Mm-hmm.
My specific skill set, my personality, there are certain things that are just me, inherently are mine. But like the family name, you might say that you mentioned earlier, we do this or we don't do that. That's not mine. I belong to it.
Mm.
And whether it be our like a family farm, if it's been in the generations for 5 generations, it's not mine. It's not my dad's or my brother's or my great grandfather. It's not my great grandkids. It's everybody's. And to make sure that as a steward, it exists where it's as good or better when it passes on. That service that I would give of myself, the things that do make me who I am, that's really that mission. What can I do to be my best and to impart the best part of me into the future and to those around me? What can I give of myself? Because I could take all day long and, like I said, be a consumer or even a parasite. And I can be a spectator and just sit back and just kind of watch, or I can provide a little bit more feedback, or I can actually go in there and produce content like you're doing right now, or produce a good that is more than just something you sell. It's something that people need. And it might be something intangible that you're not monetizing. It might be that heritage, that part of society that's missing in so many areas. That would be, that's it.
I love that. Um, what, if anything, would be of use to you at the moment that I, my friends, or people perhaps in even the audience in any way could support you in your mission? Is there anything that you're working on, whether it is something larger or something smaller? Like, is there anything where you could use help?
Honestly, I have a lot of assets and resources in that department. It'd be more emulation. If
Mm,
it's so impressive, do it yourself. Start it up. You can do it. It's not hard.
right,
I'll give you
right.
some advice if you want.
The,
And that's actually something, we talked the other day, moving forward, how to be presentable, how to engage with people, how to
mhm,
disengage when you need to, and
right.
how to achieve not just a persuasive argument, but a win-win. That it's
Hmm.
more a true collaboration instead of a compromise.
Hmm.
You know, that would be something that I'm actually going to be working on the very near future that should be available for people. But as far as what I need help on, I'd much rather people, as bad as this sounds, catch up. Show up and then catch up. Do that.
I love
Let's all
this.
get there.
Yes, that's great. In some sense, this is also the oldest and most Western or European predicament that the people at the top actually always want and need more people to join them because they are so few. It is
Yeah.
a very taxing challenge to shoulder that responsibility for oneself at the minimum, and then for others at escalating levels of severity. I mean, if you are a king, a duke, a prince, perhaps even just a tribal chief or so-called knight, it can be quite challenging to carry that burden of perhaps life and death, perhaps economic well-being, perhaps spiritual sustenance on one's back, or to do it alone. And so this is kind of the little secret message that is hidden inside of the title of this show, which is the capable few want to be the capable many, but it is hard to accomplish that for any stretch of time. And so, in closing, then, I I invite people to consider what in their life they can want and perhaps are even asked and invited to show up to and for. And in the way that Josh said it, uh, what is the it that you yourself may not be uh, creating, but that you are of? What is the it that you came out of, and what is the it that you are giving yourself to beyond the moment to moment, day to day, week to week, month to month way of articulating and pursuing your narrow financial or other self interests? What is it really that you want to not just leave behind in kind of this abstract legacy sense, but really who and what is it worth to sacrifice personal pleasure in the moment to see flourish into something larger? And I think for many that finds a very clear answer in the form of family. It is, I think, the most tangible of ways that we can see our own sacrifice flower in the well-being of others. But to the extent that that doesn't satisfy you, or your capacities go beyond that, or you have additional bandwidth, really think about what it takes for your children not just to be fine in the moment, but perhaps to stay fine for enough time that they themselves can have their own children and kind of hand off the infinite game to their descendants and thereby honor your memory. So thanks you everybody for listening. Josh, do you have any last words before I close?
I could take 30 seconds and just kind of reiterate what you just said. The whole reason I got into this circle with you and everybody else was essentially if something happened to me, what would happen to my kids?
Hmm.
And yeah, they're good kids, they're good boys, but just being a good person isn't always enough. And right now they're underdeveloped. I'm developing them. I'm still developing myself. And the work that people like you do and people in our circles do is developing a civilization and society and creating heritage. And to me, that's worth devoting a life to. It's very
I love it.
important.
I appreciate you coming on, Josh. Thank you for trusting me with your first podcast appearance. It remains
Thanks
to
for
be
having
seen.
me.
Remains to be seen whether there will be any further ones. I look forward to hopefully seeing you next year in this new event that you're preparing. And thank everybody for listening. And